in about 2 minutes. So I do ask that everyone please take your seats so that we can be ready to start on time. Welcome to all who are joining us this morning. Erica Light on our staff will call the roll to establish a quorum. Erica?
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell.
Here.
Mr. Eby.
Here.
Mr. Edwards.
Here.
Mr. Ferguson.
Here.
Mr. Hamby. Mr. Jensen.
Here.
Ms. Kim.
Here.
Dr. House. Mr. Morrow. Chairman Hartgrove.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 7 members present.
Thank you. I do want to note that Mr. Cobbins will be joining us. He will be arriving a little bit later. We do have a quorum present, and we are duly convened without objection. Mr. Nate Morrow and Mr. Garen Hamby are excused. I do want to start out by thanking the University of Memphis for hosting us. We have had a wonderful time here on the beautiful campus of the university. We delayed this trip from last year because of COVID-19, and we weren't sure that we would be able to come back this time, but I'm so pleased that we've been able to make that happen. I do want to thank President Rudd and Provost Ninan for hosting us and for their hospitality during our time here, for the State Board workshop as well as dinner last night that they hosted for us. And they truly rolled out the red carpet, and we had a great experience last night having a tour of their very impressive Lori Walton Family Basketball Center. Again, thanks so much to them, and also thanks to Shelby County School Districts. We had a great day yesterday with them. And Dr. Sarah Morrison will provide highlights from yesterday's workshop as well as our school visits. Dr. Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, it was a full and really fun, exciting day for the board and for our team. We're grateful, as you said, to both Shelby County partners and for the University of Memphis for being such incredible hosts. We have been looking forward to this meeting for a long time, as you mentioned. Just for those of you that were not with us, a quick recap of the events of yesterday. We started early with visits in various Shelby County schools in the Whitehaven area for the most part. We had one group that was visiting the University of Memphis school here on campus, so we had a nice variety of schools to see and to talk with, teachers and principals and students. That was a great way to start our morning. Then we all convened together at Robert R. Church for a really exciting Read for the Record event that Shelby County had been planning, and it was really a delight to be part of that. There was such enthusiasm and excitement for literacy. The children were just full of energy and excitement for the day, and it was really fun to be part of that, to see just the great work happening here in Shelby County and how they're really focused on literacy at a very early age. From there, we came back to University of Memphis campus for lunch and our workshop. We had a number of important discussions about dual enrollment, looked at TCAP results in detail with our partners at the Department of Education, talked a lot about the summer programming from this past summer in terms of the summer camps, the after-school events, the tutoring that's going to be happening and is happening this fall. So a lot of good updates on that front. And then we ended our day at the Lori Walton Basketball Center, as Madam Chair mentioned, which was really a great way to cap off what was a full and fun day for all of us who are basketball fans, and I count myself among them. It was really fun to get to do the tour and see the incredible facilities that the players here enjoy, and just, like I said, a really nice way to end the day. So looking forward to more good discussions this morning.
Great, thank you very much. Commissioner Schwinn will be joining us, and when she arrives, we will ask her to provide some opening remarks as well. So as we move into the consent agenda, I have several things that I need to notate for everyone. First of all, we will be pulling item 4M, Civil Rights Compliance Rule 0520-14-04, and postpone the final vote until a future meeting. And this is at the request of House Government Ops Chairman Reagan. He asked that we pull that item. And also, we will be, while approving the consent agenda, I do want to add clarification on why average measurable objectives are not included as planned yesterday in workshop. Director Morrison did share the rationale, but for the record, for this particular meeting, I do want to let everyone know that, certainly we had a lengthy discussion during our July the 23rd State Board meeting, and we moved consideration of AMOs for the 21-22 school year to this meeting while we were working closely with the Department of Education and other education stakeholders to find a legislative solution. To find a solution because the legislation shows potential conflicts in statute regarding which year's data can be used. TDO agreed not to present the AMOs today for our approval, and subsequently we received a letter from Representative Mark White, Chairman of the House Education Administration Committee, acknowledging the potential conflicts and asking that we delay voting on AMOs as well. And as is our custom, we would like to read the letter from Chairman White into the record, and Dr. Morrison will do that for us.
Yes. The letter says, Dear Chairman Hartgrove, in discussions with directors of schools throughout Tennessee, I've heard an overwhelming request that annual measurable objectives, AMOs, for school year 21-22 be based on baseline data from the 2021 school year. It is also clear that certain legal provisions from our special session earlier this year have led to confusion about which data sets can be used in this process. For this reason, I request that you delay any vote of the board on this matter until I can introduce legislation to bring clarity to this process. I will consult with stakeholders, including the State Board of Education, Tennessee Department of Education, Tennessee Organization of School Superintendents, educators, and others to bring a legislative solution. I would further request that the Department of Education produce and disseminate draft AMOs for all Tennessee school districts using baseline data from school year 2018-19, as well as baseline data from the school year 2020-21, and that this be done for informational purposes only. While I know it is the State Board's custom to pass AMOs in the fall to ensure districts know their academic targets for the school year, in this case, I think our best approach is to share this information, but hold off on any formal State Board vote until legislation can clarify allowable options for the school year 21-22. I've always valued the partnership between the legislature and the board. I look forward to working with you on this and many other issues. Thank you for your kind attention to this matter. Sincerely, Mark White, Chairman of the House Education Administration Committee.
And I believe you're going to add just a couple of points of clarification on the distribution of the 18-19.
Well, just to note, and I mentioned this yesterday, districts already have 18-19 sort of draft AMOs, which was what was presented in July. I know they're in the process, the department is in the process of sharing the 2021 draft AMOs with districts as well, so they should have that information soon as part of their accountability files. But as Chairman White references in his letter, I think that'll be important for both sort of our Plan A, which is, you know, should the law be able to be changed, which we hope it will, then we'll be able to vote on AMOs in the spring with a baseline using 2021 data. If that were not to happen, then 18-19 would be our backup plan. So here in the next few weeks, districts should have both of those data sets available for planning and monitoring purposes.
Very good. Thank you. So with this explanation, I ask for unanimous consent to adopt the consent items, including our agenda for the day, with the things that were noted previously. Is there an objection?
No objection. I presume or assume that you would respond in writing to Chairman White. Thank you.
Yes,
I have that letter here too if you'd like me to read it, but we did respond in kind.
definitely. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Moving into report items, this is item 2 of the agenda. Item A, State Board Literacy Subcommittee update. Ms. Allie Gaffey on behalf of our chair of that committee, Nate Morrow.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Allie Gaffey, Director of Engagement and Accountability for the State Board. Nate Morrow is unable to be here with us. He is our chair, so I am reporting out about our literacy subcommittee meeting, which was held on September 28th. This was the second meeting held of the Literacy Subcommittee, and it was focused on data outcomes and updates on literacy efforts from the Department of Education. We had both Jack Powers and Lisa Coons present both statewide literacy data from the spring TCAP assessments, as well as the pre and post benchmark testing data, which you all received a full presentation yesterday at the workshop, so they gave us a preview of that back in September. We also heard additional literacy effort updates, including the Reading 360 summer trainings, in which they had 22,000 educators complete one of the courses in the early literacy trainings, as well as Reading 360 Virtual Summit, in which nearly 2,000 educators participated at the end of September, which was focused on foundational literacy skills instruction. So the department shared an anticipated timeline for the reading screeners that districts started administering this year, and will likely reconvene in March to review and discuss the winter benchmark screening results, which are due to vendor platforms by mid-February. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I should have you do my update. Because the next item, and I will try to be as brief and succinct as she was, mine is State Board Educator Preparation and Licensure Subcommittee. As chair of that committee, I've been asked to report out to you. We had a 2.5-hour meeting with presentations from our staff, State Board staff, as well as from the Tennessee Department of Education. Erica Light on our staff provided an excellent update on the education preparation report card, and she shared that scoring for the upcoming year, noting that provider impact domain will remain unscored. Ed Preps will not obtain an overall rating, and ratings will be provided for candidate profiles, employment and retention, and candidate assessments. Amy provided an update, Amy Owen on our staff provided an update on the Ed TPA cut scores. We have that item before us today, and as well as Ed TPA scoring trends and the impact of COVID-19, the disruptions that have occurred there. Amy also presented an overview of the LEA teacher training program rules, which we will hear today, so I will not say much about that, except that that did help the committee to understand where we were moving in that direction. Dr. Annie Insana with the Department of Education provided an excellent update on the work with EPPs and presentations that they made to all of the EPPs during the TACTI conference last month. One of the critically important things that she shared that we were all excited to hear about, it was innovation grants that EPPs had an opportunity to apply for. And there were a total of $645,000 awarded to several universities, UTK and Deans for Impact. So we did hear great updates from the individuals who represent those particular institutions in the work that they're doing in the literacy space. And there are 3 content areas that they focused on: foundational literacy, trauma-informed instruction, and high-quality instructional materials. The grant period ends, I believe as I understood it, in August, and once they are completed, then all the content will be made available to all of the EPPs so that they will be able to implement these in terms of standards alignment in these 3 content areas. There were several other updates, but the other piece of the meeting that was very important was the conversation with the executive board of TACTI. Their chair-elect is Dr. David Sehack of UTK, and I usually mispronounce his name. And so that was our closing agenda item, but that was a very strong and robust discussion with them sharing a lot of great information with us, and we found ourselves saying, what could we do to better engage with EPPs? And so we certainly do that through this subcommittee, and they do participate to listen and hear the kinds of things that are coming down the pike. But getting their input is vitally important. They have excellent suggestions, and there is certainly an advisory group. I think it's Bob, you serve on that to represent the state board. But anyway, at any rate, it was a great discussion and an excellent meeting. Bob, I believe you have something that you wanted to add.
Yeah, just as you said, I do represent the state board on the EPP Advisory Council. We had a meeting since that meeting on October 20th, and we continue to get, it's a great opportunity to get perspective from the EPPs, a different perspective to hear it from the EPPs. And I'll just say that they continue to talk about how we interpret the data. They like seeing data presented, and so what they would like to do is continue conversations on how data is interpreted, and I think that's something that we probably will want to take up later.
Yes, of course we will. Okay, thank you for that. Before we move into items on first reading, I want to welcome Commissioner Schwinn and call on her for comments that she would like to make this morning. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. I was on a wonderful school visit in Shelby County, and we were examining a crime scene. So that was very important to figure out who done it. So I couldn't leave until then. But good morning. There's just a couple of things that I want to make sure to highlight. There's a lot going on in our state, and certainly in education. That continues to be the trend that we are on. So first is around ESSER and ESSER plans. Those have all been submitted. We have over 700 plans that we are required to review between the needs assessment, this health and safety plan, the spending plan, the public plan, and the community engagement plan. And so our team is working and sending a lot back and forth with districts to get that approved, meet the federal guidelines for that. Another thing just to keep in mind is that we don't yet have final rules and policies related to data collection requirements from the U.S. Department of Education. They are still in their rulemaking process. We are about a year in, so that is a challenge for us, but they do expect to finalize that in January-ish. And so that'll be about a year after our districts have received their ESSER 2 allotments. ESSER 3 was about a couple months later. So something that you will likely be hearing from districts in your area does relate to the data collection. It is significant. It is also at the student group level. So for major expenditures, we will be collecting that information. We do hope that they will move quite quickly on this because it is a big deal. It is going to be a lot of back work for our districts, and wanted to make sure to highlight that. And then I think the biggest thing that we are talking about, and we'll be talking about every day for at least the next 90 days, is school funding. So I want to say thank you in advance. I know all of you are sitting on a subcommittee. Appreciate that. Appreciate your engagement in this. It's a really big deal, I know, in terms of having robust conversations that ideally are action-oriented. From a structure perspective, I wanted to take just a couple of minutes and just walk through how this all comes together. So from an engagement, there are lots of different ways people around the state can engage. We just finished our second town hall last night at the Civil Rights Museum. It was incredible. We had one before that in Sumner County. So we're having 8 across the state. We tried to divide the locations between rural, suburban, and urban, so that way we had some collection within those 8 town halls in each of the 8 core regions. But on top of that, we're having Twitter town halls. There will be a newsletter that comes out regularly, a monthly FAQ. We are giving packets to every district as well as community organizations so they can hold their own town halls, and that way everybody can participate. We have an open email address, and then we have a number of other kind of smaller engagements that we're doing by invite as community organizations would like either the department, myself to attend, or certainly anybody else. The other thing that we've done is we've mapped out every district to make sure that there's some formal engagement every district has with this, whether that's sitting on a subcommittee, one of our engagement groups that happen monthly, our Superintendent Study Council, maybe there's a town hall in their area, et cetera. We have about 50 districts who are not represented, so we were actually quite pleased that we had 100 districts, essentially just under 97 that were. So for those, we are going to split them up and do smaller events in each of those districts. So every district will have a very specific targeted opportunity to participate. And then finally, every school board member, every county commissioner, and then every superintendent is on a separate, it's not really a subcommittee because it's everybody, but because of the local match in those conversations and because those are ultimately the stewards of the public funds, they will all have an opportunity to engage regularly around this topic. So none of those folks necessarily, especially school board members and county commissioners, are on a subcommittee because they're all on a subcommittee. It's really important from the fiscal stewardship component. I say all that because that's a lot of engagement. That all filters up to the subcommittees. Each piece of engagement that comes into the department will be coded to one or more subcommittees. Oftentimes, with the types of emails we're getting, they're going to be coded to lots of subcommittees. And so we want to make sure that every subcommittee, let's say you're on the English Learner Subcommittee, you would then have all of the public comment that's come in related to English learners and what that might mean for a formula. The subcommittees are responsible for reviewing that public information, coming up with recommendations, saying this is a must-have, a should-have, a nice-to-have, or something else, and then costing those recommendations and prioritizing them. That will happen iteratively every couple of weeks for the next 3 months. Those recommendations will go to the Public Steering Committee. That steering committee is facilitated by myself as a delegate for the governor, but essentially is the elected representatives because they are the ones, if they want to consider a bill and pass a bill, they will be the ones who will do that. And so it is just the finance or education representatives from the House and the Senate. I had a question about the Senate. They got Senator Hale because the House had a couple more representatives because they have more committees. And so I'm trying to even it out and everyone gets the same. So Senator Hale's on both the Finance and the Education Committee. So he was the addition to make the Senate and the House equal. And so they will review all of the recommendations from those subcommittees and come up with potentially a formula that would potentially be considered later. So it's just a way that I wanted to kind of walk through that so people understood, number one, from a policymaking perspective, this can't just be the elected official policymakers. This has to start with a lot of people providing a lot of feedback. Every single comment will be included, codified for the record, and made publicly available. But it is also, as you all are having conversations, this is about creating something new. I think we've all learned over the last couple of years it's really easy to tear down and take apart and pick at things. It's really hard to come up with new ideas and think about what you want and what is possible and the vision of what could be. That's what we're doing. It's a brand new formula. It has nothing to do with the BEP. It is something new. So we're asking people to come up with what they want, what they hope, what they think could be, what they would like funded. And those are the things we can then cost and figure out. And so super excited. It's a lot of work over the next few months. I think we're taking it really seriously, and hopefully we'll get to a really good place and see where we are come January. But appreciate all of you for participating and giving more of your time than you already do, and certainly continue to engage, and happy to, certainly at your discretion, happy to answer questions that might come up.
Thank you for that, because I know I still have questions, and I have more opportunities to speak with you than some of the other board members. But I'll let Mr. Edwards, I believe you want to go first. You have some questions?
I compliment you and the governor for this. It's sort of like one of those deals where you think, yeah, you know, you kind of always should have been doing, not you, but public should have always been going about it this way. Sort of zero cost busting. Will the end product look like on the recommendations? Here's what seems to be a consensus, because this is what is needed to yield this desired result, and be able to link the money to those results?
Yes, sir. So I think and appreciate you just kind of flagging that for me. From a budget creation perspective, this is what we call a student-based formula. It's different than money follows the kid. I want to say that very clearly, because money follows the kid has lots of other connotations. This is about public school funding and only public school funding, but it is based on the needs of individual students. So how it works is you have a base for dollar amount, and that's what every kid gets no matter where you live. And then you add weights on, so additional funding for maybe, let's say, economically disadvantaged, maybe it's rural, maybe it's urban, maybe it's a student with a disability. You would add on additional funds, and then you can have kind of additional components on top of that. Ideally, what we are doing is the subcommittee's part of their process is taking all of the recommendations and then looking at what are those recommendations that are necessary for school operations, or that we know are research-based best practices that will move achievement forward. I think one that has come up in every town hall, and so I'll share that, there was a lot on things like concentrated students with disabilities at schools, concentrated poverty, looking at that, a lot on school psychologists and counselors. So making that connection between the research base, the recommendations, and then putting that into a formula is going to be part of that process. Yes, sir.
Other questions or comments, Mr. Jensen?
Thank you.
Jensen?
Commissioner, thank you for your hard work. It just seems like we've got so much going on with all of this, with the PPP money, how do we look at and implement best practices on this? I mean, you're going fast. You got a tremendous amount of energy behind this from you and the department, and I'm just curious about how you're thinking about this. And I know it's myriad of details, but how are we thinking about this at the top? Mm-hmm. You know, where are we headed with all this? And I'm just curious to get a sense from you about, we got all the myriad of details and all that, but where are we headed? Is that a fair question?
It is, and I think there's kind of two ways that I want to answer that. So I think one is around just from a process perspective. And so from the timeline, and I think that's a question we're getting a lot, we did a 50-state summary. So every state, their existing system, kind of what are the characteristics of those systems, and then really dove into those that have made significant overhauls of their funding formula. There have not been that many, because I think to the point earlier, it's really hard to do. It's really hard to do. And so we've looked at the last 5 or 6 states. Everyone who's passed something, there have been some who have not passed anything, but the ones who have passed something have done it in a very targeted timeline for that laser-like focus. What happens is when you have extended timelines, everyone gets distracted with everything else, and so it kind of meanders along and starts to lose steam. When people know that we've got 3 months, we are all laser-like focused on this issue, you get more engagement, you tend to get more people who are invested in the end product, and it is a tighter end product. There are fewer loose ends. And that's what we've seen in a lot of states recently. And so we looked at that to kind of get an understanding of the 50-state overall, kind of where different directions have been and where people have gone. Where we want to be is 5 years from now, we want to look back and say, we created a school funding formula in this state that we know and can stand behind serves every single child for that child's needs. Not the aggregate system, because I might not look like or have the same characteristics as the majority of students in my system, but that we fund the needs of the child. And every single child's going to look a little different and need something a little different. An example that I'll give that we talk about a lot are the ratios. And so when you think about a student-based formula, it really is looking at the needs of each student, and that aggregates up. What that does is for our small school districts, so let's say you need 500 students to get a principal, we've got a lot of schools that are under that. And so the district has to supplement and add more money to get that principal. It shouldn't be that way. We need to have flexibility so that we have a certain number of students. That's what the district's funded at, and they can make the best decisions towards really strong outcomes. And so when we look back in 5 years, I want to be able to say parents know exactly how their child is funded and what the state is doing and what that should pay for. We have our districts who have funding based on the needs of the students enrolled in those districts, and they're able to use those funds in a way that is going to drive outcomes, and that we have transparency and accountability to the dollars themselves, so that when I get the question from the General Assembly, how much money do we spend and what are the outcomes, it's not filled with 100 different caveats for all the grant programs that are here, there, and everywhere. We should be able to say this is how much money came in, this is how it was spent, and here's what happened for student achievement. And we don't have the ability to do that right now in the same way that we might be able to with a student-based funding formula. And so that's why we want to explore that opportunity. And be able to really think about what is possible in terms of that kind of transparency for the public, and I think accountability to results.
Just with follow-up.
Yeah.
So we're getting this huge infusion of monies into these systems, and 3 years, whatever the time frame. This is more an expression of concern that we get this infusion of cash into a system, and 3 years it's not there. Or how do we think about it? And this is more of a concern I'm expressing. I don't need a specific answer, but how do we, as a board, think about the impacts of that? It's great to have the money right now, but 3 years from now you're going to go, oh, we did this and we can't do that anymore. That's a pretty deep concern that I've got, that we're getting a huge amount of cash, and I know we're watching over it, we're doing this, we're doing that, but still at the end of 36 months, it's not going to be there. And again, I don't need an explanation. This is more of an expression of concern that.
I think it's fair to talk about it, and I think it's wise for us to say, and I've been on calls with the joint calls with the commissioner and directors of schools, and even when she's not on the call with me, I'm hearing the directors talking about this in granular detail about what they are doing and what they must do in order to ensure that they're not putting money towards something that will go away. It's something that is immediate, it's now, it fixes an issue related to, it's all about COVID-19, it's about safety and security, the learning loss and those kinds of things. And they are hiring some positions that are interventionists, and yes, those could go away, but when they hire those individuals, what they're sharing with us is that those individuals know that. And it may be that they brought somebody back in that was a former educator who wants to come back into the system, or somebody that's currently in college and is working toward their degree, that it makes sense for them to take that kind of a role. So they're very cognizant of that, and they are very thoughtful and deliberate on how they do that. And there's recognition on their part that these monies are for specifically targeted opportunities, but not necessarily those things that are in the BEP formula, because sometimes there's confusion about, well, they got all that money, now they don't need money that comes and flows through the BEP. That's simply not valid. That's not a fair characterization, if you will. Do you want to add anything to that from the conversations you've had?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would add is that it does speak to the timing, right? So we know that if there's ever going to be a time where you move to a different formula, there are expenses that come with that, because we have a astronomical amount of federal funding, and it is one time. It does kind of beg the question of, if not now, are we going to have this same opportunity again where we have funds that are coming in, they are one time to use for that transition. Now, there's a whole other question about sustainable state funds in a new formula, whether that would be more, how much more that would be, and I think that's part of the feedback we're currently collecting. But our intent is that if this were to move forward into a next phase, we would be able to use these federal funds for transition activities, and we don't necessarily have that opportunity again. And so we certainly don't want to kick the can down the road and then put ourselves in a position where now we're using state funds when there were just so many federal funds that were available at the time. So hopefully all the stars will align. I'm an optimist, so we'll hope for that.
Thank you. Mr. Eby?
Yeah, this may be getting a little ahead of the story, but I go back to what Mike said on zero-based budgeting. Because there's so many different funds that come in, whether it's state funds, county funds, or in some areas, local shared funding, how does that get put into the formula, or how are you going to evaluate that in the process?
Yeah, I will say creating the state formula is so much easier than the local match and contributions. And so those will be two pathways. So regardless of the formula, we still have to have a conversation on the local match. It is the thing that I think frustrates a number of people, and can be with whatever formula, whether that's we have the BEP and that will continue for years to come. We still have to have a conversation on how the local match is calculated. We've got two different formulas. They come together, and it's very complicated for folks. So that is going to be one of these parallel conversations we're having with county commissioners, school board members, and superintendents to say, what are all of the different ways that this looks like in other states? There are 50 states, and they all do things a little bit differently. Talk about the options, the pros and cons, what might make sense for Tennessee if we were to make a change, and then be able to say, here's what that means in our current formula, here's what that means in a new formula, and have that conversation separately, because it's something that's going to impact everybody. But those are the folks that it'll be limited to that group, because they are the ones who essentially have to decide how much money. I will say, and I don't think, just for where we are, I don't think we're a state that will ever limit the amount that someone can put in locally. I think that's not really seen anymore. So we are going to have wealthier districts that are still going to put in more money, and that is their right to do. We just want to make sure that that floor accommodates and supports every child regardless of the district that they're in.
I'm a process person, and so I don't probably need to go here, but just in thinking about all of the discussions, all of the input, all the feedback that will be coming across, not only in the town halls and through the website, but other conversations that will be held. So it's gathering all that data, and I know you said that the information will be appropriately pushed out to the subcommittees. So my question is, with so much data, is there a template, is there a methodology that every subcommittee chair will follow for consistency and accuracy in ensuring that what bubbles up reflects the will of the majority? Because we know you'll have a couple of people that will think one thing, and maybe 50%, 60%, 70% more who think something else. So in just balancing all that, because we talk about everybody's voices will be heard, all the input will be taken, but there's no way that you could possibly accommodate everybody's requests unless everybody's in unison. So just a thought on that.
Yeah, and never once I think of any of us found that everyone is saying the exact same thing in the same way. That would make our lives very boring indeed. So it's a good point. We've been working with the Attorney General's office around a codification process. So we have a preamble that we read before every public meeting, before every subcommittee, and it does outline this isn't about the BEP. That is its own thing. We can have both, and they don't have to cross paths, and they can both coexist in conversation. We talk about the fact that not every piece of feedback will be taken. It will certainly be listened to and heard and read and considered, but not everybody's going to get everything they want. We also talk a little bit about from a codification process. So we've been working with them on every single agenda has the same template. Every single coding process for every email, comment, et cetera, is all coded in the same way. And every subcommittee meeting will be publicly available, as will every document that's included. They're all public documents. And so we have that coding system. We also have that template system so that everything that comes from a subcommittee is consistent across. And that is certainly, I think, best practices that we are learning from other states. And I think the under comment is a little bit of like, it's going to be a lot of work. So yes, that 2 hours of sleep that I had, I've given away for the good of children, but it'll be, I think, worthwhile process.
Thank you for that. You need to get your rest too, you know. Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments for the commissioner? Okay, hearing none, let's move into the action items on first reading. And the usual reminders to all of our presenters to please state your name and title for the record. Thank you. First up is, I'll let you do it. I'm not going to duplicate.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members. My name is Amy Owen. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Policy and Research at the State Board, and I have a hard act to follow, turning to our more regular board meeting items. But I do have two to talk about on first reading. The first item is a proposal to establish a new rule regarding LEA teacher training programs. Now, we've seen several pathways to allow different entities to help prepare teachers come through in recent years. So I'm going to take a minute to clarify the different options. Currently, there's an option for districts to become educator preparation providers. This is just the same as the process any college or university would go to that wanted to start an EPP. Knox County and Rutherford County have been approved to do this, and they can prepare teachers for initial licensure. We've also seen, and the board recently approved, a pathway through the Department of Education for existing professional level educators to add endorsements to their license. And this proposal today is more similar to that second pathway. It's based on Public Chapter 571 of this most recent legislative session, and it requires the State Board to approve a process for an LEA or two or more LEAs working together to establish what the law calls an LEA teacher training program. And again, this is not for initial licensure, someone who's brand new to education. This would be a program for a professional level educator in the district or districts that's running this program to receive training, to add an endorsement to their license, and to eventually hopefully take and pass the licensure assessment in that area so that they can move into teaching in a new position if they like. The rule establishes the required process for LEAs to obtain initial approval and then ongoing approval to be an LEA teacher training program, and it establishes qualifications for educators to participate. We've also added in annual requirements on data monitoring and reporting, which is very important to us to make sure these programs are effective. They would not be on the State Board Educator Preparation Report Card because that's only for initial licensure programs, but we would be able to provide you all with annual updates on how many folks participate, do they pass their licensure assessments, and we've also put in the rule trying to obtain information on their observation and student growth outcomes once they're in the classroom in their new position. The law requires this program to be in effect by July 1 of 2022, so we're moving forward on rulemaking now. If you all accept the rule today, we are scheduled to hold a rulemaking hearing on December 16th to get more detailed public feedback. And I'm happy to answer questions you may have on this proposed new rule.
Mr. Darnell.
Amy, how much interest has there been from districts in the possibility of creating a program like this?
I've had that question as well. I asked that. I spoke with both TOS and TSBA before this meeting. We usually speak to go over any questions they might have about items. And I asked, do you know of any districts that are chomping at the bit to get one of these open right away? And they did not have any specific districts that they could list as being eager to take this on. That doesn't mean they don't exist, but I also know that we all have many other things going on with pandemic response, so this might be something that's more of a trickle than a flood.
Gotcha. Because in my opinion, this is a big take, right? So, you know, with trying to deal with COVID response and ESSER and all the other issues, I just wondered if there were districts that were ready to go or maybe take some time, think about it.
Yeah, I can definitely update y'all before final reading if we do hear from any districts that have questions or that want more information about this program, but to date, I don't have a name of a district I could give you.
Yes, Mr. Edwards.
So I think what Knox County is using it for, if I'm right, is that in order to recruit people with CTE skills and to get them up to snuff on the pedagogy piece, that is the big barrier to them getting folks to do that, and that actually makes a lot of sense. I wish them well. I'm sure they'll do good, but there's more people with the skills than with the credentials, obviously. I hope that works out. It makes sense to me, I think.
Yeah, Rutherford County is using their EPP the same way for occupational. This is again just for already professional level educators who want to add an additional endorsement, and it's really focused on the academic areas. Because if you wanted to become a school services personnel, like a school counselor, you would need to go to more significant amounts of grad school. And if you wanted to add an occupational CTE area, you really need the career experience for that. You're not looking for just the LEA training. So it is those two pathways of, are you being the full EPP or are you doing this training program?
Any other questions or comments? I have one. It's minor and it may not be necessary, but my brain sees a gap. And this is on page 3 of the clean copy, item number 6, item A. The second sentence, if initial approval is awarded, LEA teacher training programs may begin enrolling, and then it says, and subsequently recommending eligible educators for endorsements in approved specialty area programs. My mind sees a gap. They are enrolled, and then they are taking the classes, or they're offering the program, the endorsement area. So it seems to me that that's missing. I know we take an assumption when we leap from enrolling to then we're recommending these eligible educators for their endorsement. So my suggestion is before second reading, final reading, to consider if it makes sense to add that. And if the conclusion of the team is no, it's redundant, it's assumed, it's known, then I would be fine with that.
Happy to look into it, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hearing no other questions, is there a motion to approve item 3A on first reading?
I move.
Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Kim provides the second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Item 3B, you're up next for that one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 3B is a course approval for changes to the World History course standards for statewide dual credit. And again, I'll give a little bit of backstory because statewide dual credit is one of several early post-secondary options that all have a little bit of a different flavor. Statewide dual credit course standards are set by faculty at the Tennessee Board of Regents and the University of Tennessee system, and by law are then required to be approved by the state board. So higher ed develops the standards, the state board approves them, and then statewide dual credit courses are courses taught in the high schools by trained high school faculty. And there's a challenge exam set by higher ed at the end, and if students pass it, they earn college level credit for that course. So it's a little bit different for what we heard about yesterday. A dual enrollment course is prepared and offered by the college faculty member as opposed to by the high school teacher. So two different pathways toward early post-secondary credit there. Over the past year or so, the Tennessee Board of Regents convened college faculty to review and update several statewide dual credit courses, particularly in the social sciences. This also had to do with them selecting some new open educational resource texts and looking at the learning objectives for the course to make sure they were rigorous and they were equivalent with what students would get at the college level. They also updated the challenge exam based on the revised standards. Additionally, the faculty are currently in the process of auditing those courses for compliance with Public Chapter 493 from the 2021 legislative session, and several of them maybe needed a second look. So one course that was ready to go at this time was the statewide dual credit World History course that the Tennessee Board of Regents certified was in compliance with that public chapter. So that is the course that is up for your approval today. In the red line copy, you'll see what the changes were to the standards, and it looks like a very rigorous course. As a former middle and high school history teacher, that is a lot of ground to cover. It's a good world survey course. So feel free to ask any questions you may have. I will confess if they're specific to the standards or why faculty did one thing or the other, I'll have to take them back to TBR, but of course, I'm happy to do so.
Mr. Darnell.
I would echo that. Amy, as a fellow former history teacher, when I looked at the standards, and I also received an email yesterday from a high school assistant principal with the same concerns. She was also a former high school social studies teacher. And the biggest concern, just kind of a summary of what she said, was that we're checking a list. Mm-hmm. We're, instead of getting a deep understanding of many of these standards. And again, I know this argument always comes up when standards review is in social studies, because, you know, who is to say what event's important and what's not? But I think her big concern was, you know, we're just checking off things on a list instead of truly getting deep into kind of the big ideas. So you may be able to speak to that through the process, and not only world history, but all of the social studies.
Absolutely. And I do want to distinguish between the high school level social studies courses, which is where the state board is charged in law with leading a very comprehensive and public and transparent review process that involves 2 rounds of public surveys, multiple committees of Tennessee educators. That's for the high school level standards. And I know that that process will begin again next summer for social studies. We're in it right now for science. The feedback is often there's too many standards, or there seems to be a gap between standards, and the educators work on that public feedback and their own professional expertise. These statewide dual credit courses are set by higher education independently, and that's very important for accreditation in higher education, as I've learned from my colleague Victoria Harpool at THEC, that they need to have independence for the faculty to set the standards at the higher education level. So K-12 can certainly give them that input that this seems like a lot of ground to cover. We're a little concerned, but it would be up to them on if the faculty wanted to make any revisions. We can also ask, you know, to be kept apprised of how students are doing on that statewide dual credit exam. Are they seeing that the breadth or depth is or is not right for the high school level? I think that could be something that we look into in the future if y'all are interested.
I think that would be something I would be interested in, just to see, you know, have we found a good balance, or is this extremely too challenging, you know, for our students to be successful in? So thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Eby?
Yeah, I had a similar thought of that. I just said, wow, you know. So my question is, are these the same standards? If I went to the University of Tennessee or one of the universities and took world history, do I have those same standards? And if not, how do the standards at a college compare to the standards we set here?
Sorry, I'm looking at my phone a friend to my colleague at THEC. I believe that for the institutions like the Board of Regents that work on these dual credit courses, it is meant to be the same as the standards as if you were taking it at that institution, so that there would be consistency, and that's why we know it's rigorous enough to be a college credit.
Mr. Edwards?
But I imagine that academic freedom also wades into that, and which gives that instructor, professor full reign to go wherever he or she wants to go in that class, which will beg the question that among certain areas as to, are they treading into areas that are considered by some to be off limits?
I think that's a great question. Sorry, go ahead, finish your thought. Well, that is why we are going in a little bit of a slower process to approve some of the social science courses that were initially proposed, and that this world history course was one that the Board of Regents did certify was in compliance with recent statute, and state board staff reviewed it as well. I think there's several others that may need a second look for what you're pointing out.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve item 3B?
Move for approval.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Ferguson provides the second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item C, 3C.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Rachel Supay. I'm the Deputy General Counsel of the Tennessee Department of Education, and I'm here to present the special education rule. On this first reading item, we have updates regarding FBAs, which is a functional behavior assessment, and BIPs, which is a behavior intervention plan. Right now, FBAs and BIPs are tools that are used throughout the state for students with disabilities regarding improving challenging behaviors. The issue is that right now, those FBAs and BIPs aren't regulated, so there's not a lot of consistency from one district to the next. So the idea behind this rule is to put some regulations in place to ensure that from one district to the next, we have some oversight and regulation to ensure consistency. With that, I'm happy to take any questions about this rule.
Mr. Eby?
Thank you. Yes, I have two questions. First, in the rule under point 243, it says when a student exhibits a pattern of behavior that impedes the learning of that of others, that's one of the stipulations for establishing the FBA. Who determines whether they're impeding the behavior? Is it just the teacher? Is it a committee? Or how's that done?
That is a great question. That would be a determination to be made by the IEP team. Any one member of the IEP team, though, can recommend that an FBA be conducted. So it could be the parent, it could be the teacher, really anyone. The school psychologist can propose it. And then if the rest of the team agrees, they'll move forward with conducting the FBA. If someone on the team proposes it and the rest of the team disagrees, then...
What about a parent of another student in that class?
So if a parent of another student
feels like that their student is being impeded.
Sure. That does happen sometimes. We sometimes get a call from a parent, and they'll say, "There's a child in my child's class who's experiencing disruptive behaviors." That parent can't refer another child specifically for an FBA, but oftentimes we can try and help navigate those kinds of situations. But only a parent can consent to testing on their own child.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then the other question, I certainly don't disagree with any of this, and I think it should be done, but at the end it says that this item has no financial impact on the LEAs, and I read through all those things associated with the FBA, what you're going to do, the analysis. How is that no impact? Do the districts agree there's no impact on them financially to do this, or how do you?
Good question. And, we will be having public hearing, rulemaking hearing between first and second read. So LEAs are certainly welcome to submit any comment if they disagree with that. We would certainly like to hear from them. But what I'll say is a few things on that point. FBAs and BIPs are already being conducted throughout the districts. So, and they're already required under IDEA in certain circumstances. So this isn't a change in terms of the frequency or how they're being conducted. This just puts a little more state-level regulation to ensure consistency from one district to the next. And in addition to that, the Tennessee Department of Education has a variety of contracts in place to provide training to districts free of cost. So we have contracts, for example, with Triad at Vanderbilt, and they will provide districts with training on how to do FBAs and BIPs, and this is at no cost to the district. We want to make this process as easy for districts as possible. That's why we have these contracts in place. We have technical assistance networks set up to help districts. If they don't know how to do an FBA and BIP, we are available to support them at no charge to districts.
So I would assume that there's no cost, that somebody's done an evaluation, that there's some baseline process that we have that is a certain cost, and that would be sort of what would be standardized across the districts. Is that kind of the approach that, when you take these financial impacts? I'm just curious.
Well, the FBA itself, shouldn't cost anything. It has to be provided to the parent free of charge, and that's what the F in FAPE stands for, free appropriate public education.
That's free to the parent, but again, I get that says there's no charge to no cost financial impact on the LEA. So as I just read through that, it just seemed like there's a lot of work to do there. And maybe between first and second reading, there'll be an opportunity for the LEAs to
weigh in
on that. So.
Sure, and like I said, they're already doing these anyway. I think if there was going to be any kind of pushback or feedback from the LEAs on that point, it might be with regard to who we said has to conduct the FBA. And we did try to give flexibility there. Some of the feedback we received from the advocacy community, was around a recommendation that they should be only conducted, by, for example, like a school psychologist or a BCBA. But we realized that, that might not be financially feasible for LEAs. So for that reason, we didn't put that in there to try and make this financially workable for districts. And instead, we put, some more realistic language. Let me find the exact language for you. Give me 1 second. .24, paragraph 2. Okay, there it is. Thank you, Angie. To the extent possible, the FBA process shall be led by a school psychologist, licensed behavior analyst, or other school personnel trained to conduct FBAs. So we did, add the phrase to the extent possible, or other school personnel trained to conduct FBAs to help minimize that cost concern. And again, TDOE is providing that training that we're referencing in the rule to LEAs free of charge so that we can help minimize any financial burden on LEAs.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have one question, actually not a question, a comment regarding page 4, number 10, which speaks to school personnel who must isolate or restrain a student receiving special education services shall report each individual incident or isolation or restraint to the school principal or the principal's designee. And it goes on to talk about the department providing a form. It seems to me that here we should be making it crystal clear when that report must be made, whether it's today, we could use immediately, but defining by when that must be reported by the school personnel to the designee. And I thought that we had language in that regard, similar in an earlier version, previously brought before us, but I don't see it this time. And it may be referenced someplace else,
Sure.
possibly, and I believe that may be the case.
If you flip to the next page, page 6, and Angie, you can add anything if I miss it, but if you look at page 6, right at the top, it says a copy of the report must be submitted to the department within 5 calendar days of the incident. So we give the LEA 5 days to report it to us, and we leave it to their discretion to handle or decide rather how many days they have to report it to their own special education director. But I certainly see the concern, so we can, between first and second reading, add a timeline to say that they have to report it to their own special education director within a day or two, if that would be best.
I think it would be.
Okay.
I'm thinking about myself as a parent. If I had a situation where my child was restrained and, I found out about it from others rather than hearing from the school.
Oh, certainly. And there is
timely
a
reporting.
requirement that parents be notified the same day of the incident.
So I think just to add an extra emphasis there, I would add.
Sure, that's a good
timeframe.
idea.
Thank you.
We can absolutely do that.
Thank you very much.
Any
Are
other
there
questions?
any other questions or comments for Ms. Supay? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve this item? Item 3C.
Move for approval.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Kim provides the second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next item is item 3D. Mr. Powers? I haven't been saying everybody's name, so I'm trying to do a new little routine here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, board members. My name is Jack Powers, and I'm the Director of Policy at the Tennessee Department of Education. And I am here to present to you all on first reading revisions and new STEAM standards framework for grades K through 5. So as you know, the State Board is authorized by law to approve all academic standards and adopt rules and policies governing courses of study in public schools. And that includes a State Board rule that calls for the State Board of Education to adopt standards for each subject area in grades K through 12. So this item presents new and revised K through 5 STEM and STEAM standards, which have been created in collaboration with post-secondary faculty, industry representatives, and K-5 teachers. The course is a foundational course experience providing students the opportunity to deepen their understanding of the content connections that exists between science, technology, engineering, and the arts, and mathematics. Additional feedback will be solicited between first and final reading. If approved, these changes will go into effect for the 2022-23 school year. In response to feedback from CTE directors, district STEM consultants, educators, and the Tennessee STEM Innovation Network, these new and revised standards provide stronger foundations which lead to and align with secondary coursework options, expanded post-secondary pathways, incorporate added instructional rigor, and reflect the competitive employment demands of our state. The standards are also designed to align with the attributes in the Tennessee STEM Innovation Network STEM and STEAM designation rubric. We recommend acceptance of this item on first reading, and with that, I'm happy to take any questions board members may have.
I'm sorry, Mr. Eby?
Yes. Glad to see this. The title is STEM and STEAM. In your course description, it mentions STEAM maybe twice, but then no longer throughout the entire description, it's all STEM. And I didn't see anything associated with the A aspect of STEAM, the arts. Maybe I'm missing it, but it looked like it's all STEM. So if it is truly STEAM, maybe we ought to include in the course description something about the A side of it.
Certainly, I appreciate the question. So I'm looking at the STEM and STEAM standards framework that I believe was also included in the item and should be posted online. I did flip through, there's probably more, but for example, in the grades 3 through 5 curriculum and instruction, I see compare products to identify the importance of the arts and adding aesthetics and beauty to product design. There is a lot in here on using rubrics to engage peers and go through a review process, which also harkens, I believe, to like critiques in studio art. I was able to also find, just really quickly, one more in grades K through 2 for community partnerships, identify how artists are important in video game and multimedia production. So there are elements of the arts embedded into the framework and the standards, and I'm certain that there are more in here, and happy to sit through and if you want to talk about those potentially with.
Yeah, I'm glad to see that. I guess it's just every time you use acronym throughout, it's always STEM and never is STEAM, and so I'm just thinking maybe we ought to highlight that a little more or something. Or I did see in there a couple of areas where it did specifically talk about arts, but you know, maybe in the course description, don't just say STEM, say STEAM.
Certainly, we can go back and do another pass to make sure we're consistent there.
Thanks.
I have a question on page 5. It speaks to professional development. Who's providing the professional development? Is it the department? Do the districts have to develop that professional development themselves?
So that's a good question, Madam Chair. I would say probably it's important to think about these standards in terms of how they're integrated into the school. So even though it says course, the first thing I want to note is that there's a lot of flexibility that districts have to kind of integrate these throughout different grades. So Some districts have approached the STEM and STEAM coursework into the kind of electives planning periods that some districts have, where students will kind of cycle through different sorts of courses throughout a week or a month. And other districts will embed these throughout kind of K through 5 coursework in math and science. So in that same vein, districts could handle the professional development part on their own if they've already got professional development that kind of fits some of this. And in addition, the department would also develop professional development opportunities.
Okay, and I was thinking about it from the framing of, I'm in the district, and I may not have the time to do that. I may not already have materials associated with professional development, and I might have the expectation that it's the department, and it may be the reverse on the part of the department. So I thought if it's something the department can do, I would certainly recommend that, and there would be a consistent way that that development is provided. That's just my recommendation.
Certainly.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Ferguson provides the second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Next up is the same person.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jack Powers, Director of Policy at the Department of Education. So I'm here to present on first reading the Residential Mental Health Facilities Rule. This is a new addition to the rule stemming from a piece of legislation that passed during last legislative session. So Tennessee Code Annotated 49-3-370 governs when and how state and local funding is allocated to licensed residential mental health facilities when Tennessee students are admitted to those facilities. The statute was amended by Chapter 589 of the Public Acts of 2021 to authorize funding to be allocated to certain out-of-state residential mental health facilities when Tennessee students are admitted and certain conditions are met. PC 589 directs the State Board of Education to promulgate rules to establish the procedures for approving those out-of-state facilities and for the allocation of funding. And this first reading item creates the Residential Mental Health Facilities Rule chapter as required by Public Chapter 589. And so one of the things that I want to make sure to call out on the front end with this rule is almost in every case, certainly when it comes to these 13 conditions that must be met in order for the transfer of BEP funding to occur, those conditions stem pretty much directly from that public chapter, from the law. So the conditions that must be met include but are not limited to a couple that are important to call out here kind of on the front end. One, a student is admitted to the facility under a signed written order of a licensed medical physician based upon medical necessity. So that's kind of the decision point that would dictate whether the student does go to the out-of-state facility. The other condition that has to be met is there can't be an in-state facility with the capacity to deliver the appropriate treatment. And then the out-of-state facility must be in a bordering state to Tennessee, and it must meet certain requirements related to how many Tennessee students have been served in that facility over the past year. Important to mention that the State Board will conduct a rulemaking hearing between first and second reading of this item. And so even though these rules do set forth the parameters under which BEP funding could be allocated by an LEA to an out-of-state facility, I do want to clarify that these rules will not impose any additional cost on the department or LEA, and we recommend acceptance of the item on first reading. Happy to take any questions board members may have.
Mr. Eby?
So I want to make sure I understand this clearly. Number C says that they have to serve at least 15 Tennessee students per school year the year prior. That's for them to make the application to receive funding. So for those 15 students who are attending, that facility is receiving no funding from the state for those 15 students. Is that correct?
That is not correct. So the 15 student benchmark is to make sure that they've had kind of that experience serving students previously. I don't know if, for example, if an out-of-state facility that received 15 or more students in the year prior is still serving any of those students. And there may be individuals here that can better speak to this, but I think most of the time these are shorter term stays. So I think it's likely that if a facility met that benchmark in the year prior, those 15 students probably are no longer at the facility. It is a litmus test to make sure that the facility is eligible to receive funding in the future. And I do want to make sure to note that that 15 is a double count, which means, although this is highly unlikely, it could have been a student staying in the same facility, the same student staying in a facility 15 times.
I'm struggling. So this facility is applying to receive funds from the state of Tennessee for receiving students.
Correct.
One of the requirements for them to apply to get funds to receive for students is that they would have served at least 15 students per school year. The number of Tennessee students served shall be based on the student enrollment from the school year immediately preceding the school year. So they have to have served 15 students per school year previous to that, correct?
That's correct.
So if they're applying to get funding, did they get funding for those before, for the 15 before?
No, they do not, because like I mentioned in my earlier comment, those students, well, first and foremost, this public chapter wouldn't have been law in the year prior, so there wasn't a law that would have dictated BEP funding flowing to that out-of-state facility in this way. And then two, as I mentioned, those students may or may not still be in that facility. It's kind of the litmus test to determine if, for a single student that may attend that facility currently or in the future, that those conditions are met to where the BEP funds would go for that single student now.
I understand that. But basically what that says is before any facility can become a recipient of those funds, they would have to have received at least 15 students where they got no BEP funding before that.
I believe that's correct. There could be conditions prior where a local school district may have had some sort of agreement with an out-of-state. Robin, do you want to jump in here? Yeah. Go ahead.
Am I clear in my question?
If your question is whether before this public chapter were school districts sending BEP funds to out-of-state residential mental health facilities, I don't know the answer to that question. Is that the question you're asking?
My point is, if I read this I'm not a lawyer, but if I read this and as I read it, you can't get BEP funds unless you've served 15 Tennessee students before. So therefore, if you couldn't get BEP funds, then those first 15 students had to have been without BEP funds. So I guess the parents were paying that on themselves or something.
Yes, and so let me, and like I said, I don't know exhaustively whether there has ever been a school district that could have sent money with the student before, but yes, you are correct. So these are out-of-state facilities. If a parent prior wanted their student to attend that facility, they would have had to pay out of pocket. And one thing to be clear about here too, even in this context, the BEP funds may or may not meet that full cost of tuition in these out-of-state facilities. So it could still be that there are parents that are covering the additional cost.
It just seems a little restrictive to new facilities who want to come online, that they have to go out and find 15 students who's willing to, their parents to pay for them to come in and for them to become eligible to be.
No, that's a great question. Oh, Robin Ye, policy analyst at the Department of Education, and that's a great question. So in the law, it says 15 Tennessee students in the prior school year, and so considering this public chapter obviously was just passed a few months ago during the 2021 general session. I think the effective date, like around May or so when they ended session. In order for that first year for facilities to meet that requirement of 15 Tennessee students in the prior year, you're right in that like they did not receive funding for that because this law hadn't been in place. But when you think about it, perhaps going forward and then meeting that 15 student requirement in the prior year, then like they will have received that funding for those 15 students using that duplicated account to see that like they get the per pupil BEP funds there. So I think for this first year, that initial year that we're implementing this law and enacting it, those Tennessee students that were being served in that prior school year before this law was enacted, those BEP funds were not flowing to them because the law wasn't in place. But I think going forward after that initial year, they would have received those funds to meet that 15 student requirement.
But for any new applicants, they, they've got to go through the same process. They have to have 15 students the parents are willing to send them there without, if I read this correctly, without, maybe I'm sorry.
I think, let's see if somebody has an explanation for you, and then we can move on, because I'm not sure that I'm 100% understanding what you're saying, Bob. Well, I do understand what you're saying, but at the end of the day, this is a new law that's effective now, soon. when we are ready.
I'm
I
a
know you-
facility, and I want to start providing
understand.
service. How do I do that? That's my only question.
So you would complete the application. You would have to prove that in the prior year, before this public chapter existed, that you had served 15 students using that definition of the double count, in addition to meeting the other application requirements, and you could then become eligible. And as Robin mentioned, now that we're in a period where we'll have a rule related to this public chapter, let's go forward a year or two, and then if you ask that question, did the facility receive BEP funds last year for those 15 students, the answer would be yes, because this law is in effect and the rule is in effect.
Not if I'm a new facility. If I'm a new facility, I'll stop.
No, the point is, though, that the law would not allow us to change that. It specifies 15 to be able to be eligible, so that is a moot point for us. There's nothing that we can do. There's no action we can take. I understand what you're saying, Bob, but your facility would not be qualified if you did not have 15 students you served prior.
That's all I want to do.
Plain and simple. And furthermore, if there's no institution available in the state of Tennessee, that's the only reason you would be eligible in the first place. So does that help clear it up?
Can I
Yes,
continue?
Mr. Edwards. You want to continue his?
Useless.
Two peas
So
in a
this
pod.
is an observation that the whole point of the institution is for medical treatment. And it's required by a prescribing physician who may have a determination of a diagnosis that there is a facility that has expertise in that particular child's treatment. You could go to Mayo or you could go to Johns Hopkins. They're both great, but one has something that the other doesn't, and that's where that physician's wanting to send them.
That's right, and let me clarify, it's mental health. So
That's medical, though. I mean, mental health is
True.
medical. It's so they're there getting treatment for their specific mental health needs, primarily and exclusively. And this goes to Lillian's. Well, why the hell are you even talking about it? Because it doesn't have anything to do with what. But it ignores, when we're looking at 15 students having been taught and it ignores the whole purpose why the individual physician had sent them to a specific treatment place if it was in Colorado.
And maybe I can use kind of a real example of how this would play out, and I can also kind of explain a little bit more about the intent here that might help. So if you're a family in Memphis and your student unfortunately has a mental health crisis and needs service immediately, there could potentially, depending on the availability of beds or qualified staff, the only in-state mental health facility that might be able to meet your needs could be in Bristol. Well, if that family has to put a student who's having a mental health crisis in the car and drive him 6 hours from Memphis to Bristol, that's debatable whether that's better than them going right across the border. Maybe there's a facility in North Mississippi that can serve them and has served students from Tennessee in the past because it's 45 minutes south of the border in North Mississippi. And so that's kind of the condition under which you would see this kind of rule play out. Now, to Mr. Edwards' point, that physician would have to be the one to make that call. It might be that even though there is a 6-hour drive, that facility in Bristol is the best one. But again, that would be up to the licensed physician to make that call.
I have a question, actually a comment too. on page 4 of the clean copy where it talks about compliance and monitoring. If an LEA allocates funds to an out-of-state facility pursuant to this chapter, then the LEA and the department shall monitor that out-of-state facility. And so I think there needs to be some clarity here. How does that partnership work? Does the department take the lead? Does the LEA take the lead? If I look at this as a LEA, I might say, well, I'm going to be waiting for the department to jump in here. Or is the department waiting for the LEA to jump in here? Do you see where I'm talking about?
Yes, Madam Chair, I certainly do. And
Department shall monitor. Okay.
first, I'll say I think we can definitely consider clarifying that between first and second reading. I will note that, if I'm not mistaken, that LEA and department shall monitor language does come from the law. And I'll point out that in the section of the rule above, even though it says LEA and department here, if you look at the other elements of kind of the conditions that have to be met before and after a student's placed, things like the placement agreement, things like making sure a student's IEP is continuously met while they're in the facility, the fact that the LEA is the one sending the funding to the BEP or to the out-of-state facility, it really does put the onus on the LEA, I think, first and foremost, to be responsible for that. And the department, of course, again, is called out in the law, also in addition to the LEA. But I think functionally, the LEA would be the kind of main body to monitor. But we can certainly examine that too and see if there's ways to kind of make that more clear.
I think that would be helpful and not take away from the spirit of the law.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve item 3E? Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Is there a second? Ms. Kim provides a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to take a 10-minute break at this point between items on first reading and final reading, and based on that, we'll be back at 10:31. Thank you very much. We are moving into items on final reading, and our first item is 4A. Ms. Allie Gaffey. And I don't think I need to make the reminder, but I will. Your name and title for the record. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Hello again. Allie Gaffey, Director of Engagement and Accountability for the State Board. On final reading is an item to appeal our charter school performance framework. This framework was used to evaluate the overall success and health of the State Board's authorized charter schools, which have now successfully transitioned to the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission as of July 1st. Happy to answer any questions and appreciate the applause.
That explains the big smile on her face.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve item 4A?
So moved.
Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Eby provides a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. And you have the next item, item
Yes.
B.
Thank you. This item repeals the State Board rule, which governed the timeline and process for charter schools to amend a charter agreement and to appeal an amendment petition in the event that they were denied that amendment petition in the first place from their local districts. And both of those responsibilities have now also transitioned to the Public Charter School Commission. So happy to answer any questions on this one.
Are there any questions, comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Ferguson provides the motion. Is there a second? Second. Mr. Darnell provides the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll have a roll call vote provided by Erica Light.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you. Item C.
Me again. So this rule outlines a process for the approval of a training course by the state board and provides specific training course requirements for governing board members. This is specifically for charter school governing boards, want to clarify. Revisions to the rule were made in collaboration with the Tennessee Charter School Center and include updates just to ensure language consistency, as well as the addition of education governance structures to the list of required training course content. Happy to answer any questions on this one.
Questions, comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve item 4C? Mr. Cobbins provides the motion. Is there a second? Mr. Darnell provides the second. Any discussion? Erica, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins?
Aye.
Mr. Darnell?
Aye.
Mr. Eby?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson?
Aye.
Mr. Jensen?
Aye.
Ms. Kim?
Aye.
Chairman Hartgrove?
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Item D.
Last one from me, promise. This rule outlines the training requirements for local school board members and includes the establishment of a school board advisory committee, which is responsible for evaluating and recommending training courses to the state board. So revisions to the rule since first reading include updated language to ensure consistency, as well as the clarification of a timeline for transition from the school board academy program to the approved training courses that are outlined in this rule. I'll also note that the School Board Training Advisory Committee did have its first meeting in September, in which they approved the prospective course provider application. That application is now available on our website, as well as a request for any additional feedback. As this is a new process for us, we are open to any feedback on the process or application itself. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second? Mr. Edwards provides the second. Any discussion? This one requires a roll call vote as well. Erica?
Mr. Cobbins?
Aye.
Mr. Darnell?
Aye.
Mr. Eby?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson?
Aye.
Mr. Jensen?
Aye.
Ms. Kim?
Aye.
Chairman Hartgrove?
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much. Item E, Mr. Powers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jack Powers, Director of Policy at the Tennessee Department of Education. I have before you all today on final reading updates to the career and technical education courses and standards. This item includes new and revised course standards for the following CTE clusters: agriculture, food and natural resources, architecture and construction, education and training, government and public administration, human services, marketing, distribution, and logistics. These high school courses were updated based on educator feedback for ease of use and to align more closely with competency-based industry post-secondary standards. I will note that there have been a couple of revisions between first and final reading that you can see here on the third page of the cover sheet, including some changes, very minor changes to the agriculture, food, natural resources career cluster, some changes to the education, training, career cluster, and some changes to the human services career cluster. But overall, the majority of these standards did not see any changes between first and final reading. And with that, we recommend approval of this item on final reading, and I'm happy to entertain any questions that board members may have.
Are there any questions or comments? I always look to my right, and of course, Mr. Eby does have some questions.
I'm a little hesitant to even speak now. And this
Please do not hesitate.
This is just a technicality, but under lifespan development, I admit I didn't read through all these standards, but I did read through a couple of them. And this one for infancy, toddlerhood, preschool, school age, puberty, and adolescence, adulthood, it said, research and outline the 5 areas of development. And then it gives 3 physical, cognitive, and emotional, social. So I was wondering what the other two were and why they weren't also listed. And if those were given as examples, why does it say the 5 areas of development? Or are there, and it's throughout the whole standards under infancy, the 5 areas, toddlerhood, the 5 areas of development, each one of them, and it only lists 3. So I was curious what the other 2 were.
I'm actually going to let Robin Ye, our policy analyst, take that one.
Hi, Robin Ye, Policy Analyst at the Department of Education, and that's a good note and something we talked to with our program team, because I know you had that question. So in that section of the standards, it says examples include but are not limited to, and so when we create these core standards, we have program directors that are responsible for each career cluster. They go out to the field and talk to those CTE directors in schools and districts that are, specialists in their area, and so it's a good point there that, it does only list 3 when it's the 5 areas of development, but at the same time, those CTE directors and those people that are specialists in that area are content experts and are familiar with what those 5 areas of development are. So it's a good thing, I think, to clean up in a future revision is to either list all 5 or, just say, or remove the examples of what the 3 are, but I think that's a good note.
Yeah, again, as you're setting the standards, I mean, you say the 5, and if there are 5 set ones, you ought to put them there. If it's to leave it open, there's more than 5, and the professors can choose which 5, then you say 5 areas. You don't have to say these.
Yeah, that's a good note.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Darnell.
Good morning, Jack.
Good morning.
My concern is with the teaching as a profession group of classes, okay, which are commonly referred to as TAP classes. A discussion that we have on this board all the time is what can we do to get more people in education, right? And I think this is an area where we may have some control to encourage that, right? So as I look through this, my concern is not with the standards that are taught, but with the qualifications. So if you look at teacher endorsement, it says any teacher who has completed an educator preparation program and has a current practitioner or professional educator license and secondary education covering grade span 6 through 12. Here are my concerns, okay? So you've got students who think, maybe I want to be a teacher, right, which we would love, right? We need them desperately. But then you take the class, okay, and let's say that, again, in a perfect world, in what I think should happen, right, is the principal picks an amazing rock star teacher, right, who is passionate. That would be the perfect setting, right? But in situations, that may not be the truth. So I feel like as a board, we have a little control with this, right? And I don't know what direction we should go. I think it would be very overwhelming for a first-year teacher to try to teach this when they have no experience, right? Or maybe a very short stint in student teaching. So I don't know if we need to change that to add an experience requirement, maybe 5 years. I don't know. I don't know what the right time would be. Also, I think when you're looking at level of effectiveness, I wouldn't want a level 1 teacher teaching future teachers how to be a good teacher when there are some things that they need help with themselves. Also, on the other side, for the argument, I see a principal who has 1 teacher that's available, and that's what we've got. And so do we have the teacher who is certified to teach, even though maybe they're not the best? So that's where my struggle is. But I feel like as a board, this is an area where we can add a little extra something to make sure that people who might be interested in teaching get the best that they can get. So, and other board members may want to speak to that. Or, Jack, you may have something to share.
Certainly, I think that's a very, very important point to make, and I'll echo what you kind of started your comment with, which is my assumption that, across the state, you would have building level principals and directors putting their rock star teachers in these positions, knowing what a crucial position that is, because you're going to be crafting and shaping these high schoolers and giving them their first impression of the teaching and what that looks like in theory. With that being said, certainly I do understand your concern as well. I think that if you are truly concerned there, there's a couple options. You know, I think it's important that these standards kind of pass today, just because, again, like these changes were the result of kind of stakeholder input and feedback. You know, planning for next year is starting now. We'll start into the winter. And there's always the potential to examine this again at another board meeting. The other thing I would say, especially if you're talking about putting on any restriction in years of experience, is that we would want to do some stakeholder outreach, just because that could potentially put a burden, to your point, on some of our smaller school districts that may not have as many teachers that have that experience. So I think that would just, because of the HR implications potentially in staffing, I would say we would want to kind of play it a little slower and look at that over the next several months, and make sure that if we did want to add something like that, it was done in a way that we were sure our school districts and schools could actually do. That's what I would say about it in terms of options there.
What do you say, Mr. Darnell?
So I feel pretty strongly about this with the requirement. And again, Jack, you're right. I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt school districts with the limited amount of teachers they have. But at the same time, I can see a nightmare scenario where you have just, okay, we have to take what we have, and that ruins a whole group of teachers that could have been amazing teachers, and they, you know, this teacher's not passionate about it, so this is not what I want to do. So I'm just looking for, I guess, advice on where we need to go with this to satisfy that concern that I have.
So to satisfy the concern, I think Jack just explained or gave an example of what he would recommend, and you would have to say, and the rest of the board would have to agree, or the majority would have to agree, that you accept that, or you ask for a recommendation, which means that item would be pulled and not approved today.
That's correct, and I think as I mentioned, and Angie can jump in here and correct me, if this were to pass today, there wouldn't be anything that would prevent us from doing that stakeholder engagement, having further conversation with you and looking at making the revisions and bringing them again in February, which would do the same, which in terms of timing I think would have the same, well, it would be similar as potentially holding this. It would be bringing them on first reading again. I know there's options to do first and final in certain cases, which maybe would make those timelines the exact same. But I would certainly, I think, you know, recommend that if I had a choice, is going ahead and passing these now, and we can commit to re-examining this and doing that stakeholder outreach through our CCTE team who owns these standards, to make sure that any of the additional requirements we want to put in there on teacher experience or effectiveness, that we consider that in the context of all of our districts and their staffing.
Mr. Edwards?
I think need to listen to our practitioner who's sitting here at this table for a lot of wisdom, and it makes a lot of sense. If you're okay with that, and you're agreeing that come February, we're going to have something to mend this, and that I see then I will support a motion on your part or anyone else's to go forward under those conditions.
And I'm comfortable with that. I don't want to hold up all the standards and the work that needs to be done to be ready for next school year. So I'm comfortable with that, with the assurance that you'll do the outreach, come back, and then we can change if that's what we need to do at the February meeting.
And there wouldn't be a motion at
Right,
this juncture?
right. Yes. I'm good with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Very good. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? Mr. Darnell provides the motion. Is there a second? Mr. Edwards provides the second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a question. We got a report. Oops, sorry. We got a report on charter schools. It was very well done, and I presume we'll get that again. I can't remember, a couple of meetings ago. Will there be some sort of reporting on the status of CTE across the state? Will we get a look at that at some point? How that implementation, I'd be very interested to know that.
Do you want to respond to that, Commissioner? Thank you.
I can get Jack. He's coming down slowly. Yes, so we actually, and it gives us an opportunity to highlight this actually. So Tennessee was one of 3 states that were recently highlighted in a national CTE report. We can make sure to get that out to all of you related to kind of the work that happens across agencies, so not just in K-12, but across workforce and higher ed. So we'll get that out. It was pretty exciting because we were in both, and we were the only state featured in both. We also have an annual report that we produce for CTE. I looked at kind of the mock-ups just 2 weeks ago, so that should also be available sometime in the next week or 2. I think it's going through that final comms review and with the governor's office, but we will have something very formal for you to review. But in the interim, I'll send you the national report and then send the Tennessee-specific version. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Item F.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. I'm Angie Sanders. I'm the General Counsel for the State Board of Education. And I am presenting to you on final reading revisions to add language back into Rule 0520-01-02-.31, requiring local boards of education to develop a 5-year strategic plan and a district-level improvement plan that operationalizes their strategic plan in accordance with the State Board's district and school improvement planning policy. We did hold a rulemaking hearing on this rule in September. We did not receive any feedback on that rule either at the hearing or in writing. However, we did make changes in between first and final reading in response to questions that members had at the last board meeting in July, as well as some feedback from the Tennessee School Boards Association. Those changes include adding a requirement that LEAs post their strategic plan to their website, and I think that was at the request of Mr. Eby, and clarifying that the strategic plan must identify how it supports one or more goals contained in the State Board of Education's master plan. With that, I am happy to take any questions that you all have.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
Move for approval.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second? Ms. Kim provides a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, this requires a roll call vote. Ms. Light, Erica Light.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you. Item 4G.
Good morning. Michael Derline, Senior Director of Educator Licensure and Preparation at the department. This item is the final read of the employment standards for additional support personnel rule. This item is fairly straightforward. Essentially, we're removing the employment standard requirements for speech-language pathology assistants in favor of creating a licensure pathway, which you'll hear again on final read here in a little while. Revisions to this rule were accepted on final reading at the February quarterly meeting. The board also held a rulemaking hearing in April. There were no comments, and this item was delayed to this meeting so that you all could hear this and the licensure rule in conjunction. Between first and final reading, we also removed the employment standards language for speech-language teachers because we are phasing that out in favor of the speech-language pathology assistant pathway. Happy to take any questions you may have.
Any questions for Michael? Hearing none, is there a second? I'm sorry, is there a motion? I want a second now. Is there a motion? Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Is there a second? Ms. Kim provides the second. Any discussion? This requires a roll call vote.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim?
Aye.
Chairman Hartgrove?
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much. Item H.
Hello again, Madam Chair and members of the board. Rachel Supay, Deputy General Counsel, Tennessee Department of Education. This final reading item is regarding the Individualized Education Accounts, or IEA program, which is a school choice program for students with disabilities in the state of Tennessee. Back in July, we brought this item on first reading, and it was meant to just improve readability of the rule, make clerical changes, add some definitions, and clarify some regulations regarding the IEA program. Between first and second read, only minor clerical changes have been made, and no substantive changes have been made since the July board meeting. So I'm happy to take any questions you have about the rule.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Cobbins provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Ferguson provides a second. Any discussion? This is a roll call vote. Ms. Erica Light?
Mr. Cobbins?
Aye.
Mr. Darnell?
Aye.
Mr. Eby?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson?
Aye.
Mr. Jensen?
Aye.
Ms. Kim?
Aye.
Chairman Hartgrove?
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Item I.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jack Powers, Director of Policy at the Tennessee Department of Education. I have before you today on final reading School Health Policy's Permanent Rule. Public Chapter 652 of 2020 authorized the State Board of Education to promulgate rules to address COVID-19 related disruptions. Furthermore, state law provides the State Board the authority to promulgate rules governing the operation of public education and courses of study. The School and Student Health Services Rule outlines LEA requirements related to school health policies and procedures. This item presents rule revisions to authorize LEAs and public charter schools to adopt a policy just for the 2021-2022 school year to allow students who are quarantined due to a positive COVID-19 test or exposure to COVID-19 to participate in remote instruction on a temporary basis. The rule specifies the instructional and attendance requirements for temporarily quarantined students and clarifies that LEAs and public charter schools can only permit students to participate in remote instruction on a temporary basis due to a positive COVID-19 test or COVID-19 exposure. The State Board approved these rule revisions on an emergency basis at the July 1st special called meeting. The State Board staff held a rulemaking hearing for this rule on September 17th of 2021, and no comments were offered at the hearing. There are a few very minor clerical revisions that were made to this rule between first and final reading, and with that, the department recommends approval of the item on final reading, and I'm happy to...
Okay, so just,
Am I in the wrong one?
Yeah, it's okay. Just, you're on Jane. So if you can take it out of
and
order.
since, I was going to say, since you've completed that and we're ready to take questions, I did say aye. No pressure, no pressure. We're going to stick with Jay.
Madam Chair, do you want to go? I can go back to ESL.
No. We're not going to repeat that. Let's do this. And it made all complete sense to everybody. I know, I kept hearing health and, okay. Let's go with Jay. Let's complete that. You're asking for questions at this time. You've completed. Now, unless everybody's completely confused, let's go with a vote for Jay. But let's see if there are any questions or comments first. Oh, now he has to do this. Okay. Mr. Eby.
Hello, Jack. Now, my question is, this is a permanent rule, and it says it's for 2021 and 2022. Why would we not make it permanently? If it's for, if it's for quarantine for COVID, just.
So I will defer to Angie Sanders to answer that question.
Sure. So as Jack mentioned, you all approved an emergency rule, basically the same language back in July. Emergency rules are only good for 180 days, which means that rule is going to expire sometime mid-school year. So in order for this rule to be in effect for the entirety of the 2021-22 school year, we needed to put it in place on a permanent basis. Now, whether or not you would want this rule to be able to be used in subsequent school years is something that we can have discussions with the department with, and we would be able to bring back revisions if we wanted to open that up. I think at this time, we're sort of taking a wait and see approach about what next school year might look like and with regard to COVID.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve item J, School Health Policies Permanent Rule?
So moved.
Mr. Ferguson provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Jensen provides the second. Any further discussion? This is a roll call vote as well. Erica?
Mr. Cobbins?
Aye.
Mr. Darnell?
Aye.
Mr. Eby?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson?
Aye.
Mr. Jensen?
Aye.
Ms. Kim?
Aye.
Chairman Hartgrove?
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much. We'll go back to item I, English as a second language.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jack Powers with the Department of Education. This is a final reading of the English as a Second Language program rule, which concerns the identification, screening, and service delivery for ESL students. On first reading, we had to update the screener assessment that's used for kindergarten students to determine whether or not they qualify for direct ESL services. The state switched over to a new assessment that our vendor was using, and we had been planning to switch over, and we provided ample professional development and onboarding for districts to do so. So the initial reason for this rule was really to just update that assessment and the subsequent cut scores. And if you look at the cover sheet, there's a kind of detailed description of the timeline and all of that if you want to learn more about it. But this is the final reading of that new assessment and the new cut scores. There was a very small kind of clerical revision made between first and second reading to add the word composite after 4.5. If you had read the rule before adding that in there and been a practitioner, you would have known that that referred to composite, but we added it in there just to make it explicitly clear that that 4.5 is the composite score. And with that, we recommend approval of this item on final reading, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Eby provides the second. Any discussion? This also requires a roll call vote.
Mr. Cobbins?
Aye.
Mr. Darnell?
Aye.
Mr. Eby?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson?
Aye.
Mr. Jensen?
Aye.
Ms. Kim?
Aye.
Chairman Hartgrove?
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you. You're up again for item K.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jack Powers at the Department of Education. So what we have before you is a final reading of revisions to the Virtual Education Permanent Rule. Just to give a little bit of background here, Title 49, Chapter 16 authorizes LEAs to establish public virtual schools and offer virtual education programs. And this is the rule that kind of governs those. And of course, the State Board is authorized to promulgate rules related to those programs. Revisions to this rule were made on first reading to ensure that LEAs and charter schools have very clear distinctions and rules on virtual schools and virtual education programs and the differences between those two things moving into the 2021-2022 school year and beyond. And so this item prevents revisions to clarify those differences, to further define virtual education programs, and specify conditions under which LEAs and charter schools can offer virtual education programs, and also to outline instructional attendance requirements for the virtual education programs, and to clarify the teacher of record for a student enrolled in a virtual education program or school. And the State Board approved these revisions on first reading at the July meeting. A rulemaking hearing was held on September 17th. No comments were offered at the hearing. However, a couple of written comments were submitted for consideration I believe a lot of those dealt with, and I might ask Angie to also kind of summarize them if she, if you'd like, but I believe a lot of those written comments were really about CLPs and wanting to just basically have those again. So they weren't comments that necessitated changes, right? Angie, do you want to add anything else about those public comments that y'all received?
The public comments, which have been provided in your materials, they did speak to that. Another big piece of it was around the approval of virtual materials and wanting there to be a more standardized state process for that. We've had discussions with those virtual school vendors and notified them that the way the law is currently constructed, we couldn't make the change that they were requesting in these rules. So I'd say that was the other big one.
Thank you. So in addition to those public comments that were received, between first and final reading, we did make a couple of small revisions unrelated to the rule. Revisions were made to remove charter schools from a section on public virtual schools in alignment with state law that prohibits virtual charter schools. And we also made revisions to clarify that students can participate in a virtual education program at another school or LEA if permitted by local policy of the receiving LEA, in addition to some very clerical changes that you can see throughout. And with that, we recommend acceptance of this item on final reading, and I'm happy to take any questions that board members may have.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve item K?
So move.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Kim provides the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, this one requires a roll call vote as well.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item L.
Hello again, Michael Derline, Senior Director of Educator Licensure and Preparation at the department. This is the Educator Licensure Permanent Rule. You all have seen this a number of times since last February, so I'll kind of go through the sections that have changed and the timeline for those. First of all, back in February, we recommended some pathways for folks who hold specific nationally recognized credentials to reactivate a Tennessee School Services personnel license. We also recommended a pathway for school counselors to obtain a professional license if they hold national board certification. And then we created the pathway for speech-language pathology assistants that we've talked about quite a bit. In July, you also voted to align the rule with Public Chapter 125 and 493, which provides pathways for folks who hold a professional license in another state to obtain a professional license here. Also to waive assessment requirements due to a lack of overall level of effectiveness data. And then lastly, to reactivate licenses based on professional level licenses held in another state. Since that read, we have made some changes. One is to create a pathway for individuals who obtained a practitioner license under the previous rule to be able to advance their license using a professional level license held in another state. This was a bit of a gap, and essentially what we were seeing is folks who didn't qualify for licensure advancement were then told that they had to let their license lapse and reactivate using a professional license under this new rule. That became increasingly confusing, so we're hoping that you all will allow folks to advance in that pathway. The second item is clarity regarding out-of-state pathways for speech-language pathologists. So this language was actually present in state board policy a couple of years ago. It was inadvertently removed when it was transitioned to rule, so we're recommending to, bring that back in. And then lastly, the removal of experience requirements for renewal of an instructional leader licensed professional. Another area where there was a bit of a gap. The rule says that folks have to have 4 years of experience if they're in a TASL-mandated position in order to maintain a license. There are obviously cases where individuals are in a TASL-mandated position, but only have 1 or 2 years of experience, and the rule didn't really provide a pathway for them to maintain their license. I think that's it. I'd be happy to take any questions. I know this has been quite a bit on the licensure rule over the last few months.
Are there any questions or comments for, I see a hand to my right, Mr. Eby?
I'm actually going to congratulate you and say, well done. This is a surprise, surprise. No, I really think this is a good example of how the department and the state board and people have worked together to bring about an opportunity to help our teacher shortage without impacting the quality. And thank you for all the work that you did on this.
Thank you.
I echo his comments. I can't believe I'm doing it, but I am. Because, Michael, you deserve it. No, seriously, we've had a number of conversations and interactions on challenges that were occurring because of things that were left out or challenges to moving forward, as you have indicated. So I certainly applaud you for the great work in that regard as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Ferguson provides the motion and Mr. Eby provides the second. Any further discussion? This too requires a roll call vote.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards. Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim. Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving to item N, Ms. Robin Ye.
Hi. Good morning. My name is Robin Ye, Policy Analyst at the Department of Education. I'm presenting to the board on final reading course standards for a new course Project Search. And of course, you all saw these course standards at the July board meeting. Project Search is a unique business-led employment preparation program for students with disabilities following their first 4 years of high school. The program takes place entirely in the workplace and leads to individualized job development. Students apply and are accepted into the program, and all programs are taught by licensed and endorsed special education teachers who hold a work-based learning certificate. And the student's IEP team would ensure that necessary supports and accommodations are in place for participation. The program requires a partnership between the school district and a business, and there are rigorous expectations for districts to be a Project Search site. Currently, there are 10 school districts in the state, and actually 13 sites, because school districts can have more than one, that have achieved the necessary partnerships to be part of the Project Search program. So a specific course code is needed for Project Search participation to ensure consistency and transparent data on the impact of student participation and success. And between first and final reading, very minor clerical changes were made, and with that, the department recommends approval of this item on final reading, and State Board staff concurs. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? Mr. Darnell provides the motion. Is there a second? Ms. Kim provides the second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much. I think you have the next item, too.
Yes. Again, Robin Ye, Department of Education. This next item is the approved high school course policy to add Project Search, that you all just approved, to the high school course policy. Like I said, Project Search is a unique internship program for students with disabilities, and in order for it to be offered, it will need to be added to the high school course policy. So pretty simple change. But happy to take any questions. And the department recommends approval of this on first and final reading, and State Board staff concurs.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? Ms. Kim provides the motion. Is there a second? Mr. Edwards provides the second. Any comments? Discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much. Item P.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Amy Owen, State Board of Education. Item P is before you on first and final reading, and it is an update to the Professional Assessments for Tennessee Educators policy, specific to the EdTPA assessment, which is a portfolio-based assessment of an educator candidate's pedagogy, so their teaching skills. This is an assessment that we've been phasing in Tennessee for a number of years, and on this coming January 1st of 2022, we are slated to move to a cut score of 42 on most of the subjects, which is the nationally recommended cut score from the vendor Pearson, which works with Stanford and the Scale Institute. However, we have been hearing from educator preparation providers across the state that our candidates in clinical placement this year continue to face challenges to completing their clinical placement. Some of those are related to COVID and quarantine periods. We've also had natural disasters like flooding in areas of the state. So based on feedback that we've heard from EdPrep providers, staff are proposing a 1-year delay to maintain our current cut score at a 40 for most rubrics until January 1st of 2023. I do want to share that there is only one state that currently has a higher cut score than Tennessee. California is at a 41, so we would be the first state to move to a 42. So I just want to point out we're not lagging in any area at the moment. We have also been able to look at some data on recent cohorts of Tennessee educators. Erica Light on our staff looked into that. In our most recent cohort for which we had data, we had 125 candidates who passed at the cut score of 40 who would not have passed at the cut score of 42. So particularly as we continue to see these logistical challenges and in light of teacher shortages, we did not want to impose a change at this time that may result in having more shortage areas. I will note that we have also heard from some stakeholders in EdPrep that it may not be necessary to increase the score to a 42 at any point. We've had initial conversations with the vendor about that and why states have or have not moved to higher cut scores. That's something that we want to continue looking into, particularly as we have data from the most recent school year to see, are EdTPA scores well correlated with having higher classroom observations or even student impact scores? In other words, are we going to see a difference in the quality of educator if we move from a 40 to a 42? And if we're not, is it valuable to make that push moving forward if we potentially lose some educators? So that's not what is up before you today. Today is just looking ahead 1 year, but wanted to give you a preview that there's a chance this will come back before you. If you have any questions on this 1-year delay, I'm happy to take them at this time.
No questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Mr. Darnell provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Edwards provides the second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it and Any opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved.
Great.
Thank you very much. You have the next item.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Amy Owen, State Board of Education. The second item I have today here is approval, or I should say it is action on textbook and instructional materials waiver requests from 2 LEAs. As you know, Public Chapter 770 of 2020 provided the State Board with authority to approve textbook and instructional materials waiver requests from LEAs, and we subsequently adopted Rule 0520-01-18 to establish a process for reviewing these requests and making recommendations to the Board. We've had several LEAs submit requests for textbook waivers for what is called a limited use adoption. So that is something where they don't intend to use the material district-wide, but only in certain settings. In this case, we have a waiver request from Houston County for use in a proposed virtual school, and from Rutherford County for use in their adult high school, which has an online program as well. Both of these requests are for online curricula provided by vendors. And in accordance with state law and our rule, we turn to our subject matter experts at the Department of Education to review the alignment to standards of those proposed materials. And they gave us some areas of feedback where the courses did meet alignment to Tennessee standards and some areas where it did not meet. And that's really what helped generate the recommendations before you today, along with other factors that are included in the rule, like the LEA's justification for why they need a waiver and whether there are adopted materials in that subject already. Based on the department's subject matter experts review, we have recommendations in math, ELA, and science. These LEAs did request reviews in other subjects as well, and I know the department is seeking content experts to conduct those reviews for a future meeting. Some of the recommendations are to move for approval. Some are what is labeled pending, where the materials are not currently fully aligned with state standards, but the LEAs could submit supplemental materials to potentially allow them to be approved at a future date. So this item is actions based on what is listed in the cover sheet, based on State Board staff recommendations. So for some LEAs and subjects, it's approval. For some, it's saying that it's pending, but they could come back to us with more information.
Mr. Eby?
Well, Amy, timing, are the LEAs using these textbooks this year?
We have been very clear with LEAs that they should not purchase or move forward with using textbooks and instructional materials until they're approved for a waiver by the state board. That is contrary to several state laws that I'm aware of. So I know in particular Houston County is waiting to be able to open its virtual school to have an approved curriculum that they can use. And Rutherford County is aware of that requirement as well for their adult high school.
Okay, so, thank you.
How many other schools are out there waiting for their textbooks to be reviewed and subsequently approved?
Great.
What did you say?
Sure. We have the 2 waivers that are being acted on today. They have a few more subjects that could be acted on in the future. There are also 4 other LEAs that have submitted waivers for a variety of reasons and materials. We have been waiting for some legal guidance on how to interpret recent state statute with regard to materials that in some way reference Common Core state standards. There were 2 recent public chapters that would affect the board's ability to approve and district's ability to use those materials. And we wanted to make sure that we had the most comprehensive legal guidance for both you all making this decision and also for school districts as they're thinking about what to use. We are, as I understand it, very, very close to having that guidance finalized. And I've been in consistent communication with those districts about why we haven't been able to act on them at this time. But we were able to act on these waivers because they did not have potential conflicts with those new laws.
So then based on what you've already shared, they're pending, they're waiting, they should not be using those books, and we understand.
That is correct under state law, unless something is approved by the State Textbook Commission and then the State Board, or is approved by the State Board via a waiver. It should not be used as the primary instructional material for the grade. It shouldn't be the 180-day textbook. LEAs have a lot of authority when it comes to supplemental materials, so something to use for particular units or for particular strands of standards, and we don't look at those at the state level.
Understood, and I think you also mentioned that the department will be reviewing those that are waiting approval for social studies textbooks, correct?
Social studies, and there were some requests for things like fine arts and CTE areas, so I know it's challenging. In the initial law, the board did not have the ability to set a time frame for when these waivers would come in, so they were coming in all throughout the year when people may have already had different priorities allocated. We were able to adjust that in a version of the rule that's going to go into effect in the next few weeks here, so that should be able to provide some more consistency for when folks can expect, that some of their time might be taken looking at these waivers.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Eby?
I want to go back to a couple of things you said. You said that Houston was not using it.
Mm-hmm.
Rutherford was aware of the law. Do we know of any instances where, whether it's Rutherford or any of these others, are actually using these textbooks that haven't been approved, that are on their waiver request?
I wouldn't want to speak to that because I'm not in a monitoring authority. I don't know if anybody else would like to speak to that, or if we can follow up with you later. Go ahead, Dr. Coons.
We are not aware. We have frequent emails from them asking us when they get to, so we are under the assumption and not aware that they would be using any of those materials.
So if they don't, because looking at your assessment, some of these things look like they were pretty far away from meeting the standards. And so at what point in time, if we find out that they've used them, or the year is over and they've used them, what's the consequences there?
I may need to look at legal counsel. I believe there is some statute on if LEAs are not in compliance with state laws, but again, not being the monitoring authority, I would look at either Angie or I know that someone at probably Christy Ballard could follow up with us after the fact.
Yeah, we can consult and get back to you all on that. There's laws specific to what happens if they violate the Common Core, the recent legislation regarding Common Core that Amy mentioned. But If it's not a Common Core issue and it's just a general issue of use, then I'd have to take a look at that and get back with you.
I think that, I mean, we have textbooks for a particular reason, and we approve those textbooks. I think it's important that the districts understand that and whatever consequences associated. If they're out there teaching with these that are as deficient as what it appears that they are, then we need to be sure they understand the consequences.
Absolutely. Happy to follow up with you.
Thank you.
This is not from a legal perspective, but just a quick comment. We've been working really closely with our partners at the Department of Education to try to figure out what feels like a three-legged race on some of these new waiver requirements and the new laws that are complicating the ability to approve these. So as Amy and Lisa both said, and we've been very clear with districts that they are out of compliance. They are not to use these textbooks until they're approved. That said, it has taken an extraordinary long time, too, for us, across agencies to figure out some of these legal complications and also how we're going to build the capacity to review some. So hopefully, moving forward after getting the rule in effect and having timelines and sort of a little bit more predictable schedule, we'll be much better situated to approve these in a timely way. But I absolutely hear what you're saying, too. I think it's making sure that they understand the world that they're living in and also hoping to get to a place where we can do this more expediently moving forward.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Thank you very much, Mr. Edwards. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Ferguson provides the second. Any discussion further? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, Mr. Jack Powers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jack Powers with the Department of Education, and I have here with me the agenda, and so I'll be presenting on R, which is the state identified reward and priority exit schools. We'll close out today's meeting on a positive note by presenting schools that have exited the state priority list or schools that have been newly identified as reward schools. I want to take just a moment and read certain parts of the cover sheet just to be kind of really clear about exactly what it is that we're presenting today and how and why. So in accordance with state law, the Tennessee's accountability system as approved in its ESSA plan, we are charged at the department with presenting to the State Board of Education a list of reward schools every year. And so that's what we're doing here. I want to take a moment to kind of touch on Public Chapter 2 from this past 112th Extraordinary Session, which of course was the Hold Harmless legislation, and be really specific about how that intersects with this list of schools that we're presenting to you here today, because as you know, that Hold Harmless provision did just that. It held districts harmless, it held schools harmless. It allowed for schools to exit lists and have new designations if they were positive. So Public Chapter 2 of the first extraordinary session provided a pathway for schools to be held harmless from negative consequences of accountability if 80% or more of an LEA or public charter school students in grades 3 through 12 participated in TCAP that was administered during the 2020-2021 school year. If LEAs in public charter schools met the TCAP participation threshold, then student performance or student growth data from the 2020-2021 TCAP administration could not be used to assign a letter grade or other summative rating to a school, identify a school as a priority school, or assign a school to the Achievement School District. According to Public Chapter 2, schools could still exit priority status based on data from the 2021 TCAP administration. And so that is part of what we're presenting here today, schools that exited priority status based on data generated during the 2020-2021 school year. All LEAs in public charter schools exceeded the required 80% participation rate and therefore qualified for the hold harmless protections found in Public Chapter 2. And I just want to take a moment, of course, to commend all of the educators, district leaders, other stakeholders across the state for achieving that 80% participation rate or more. I know that we talked yesterday about having a 95% participation rate across the state, and I think that it just again speaks to kind of the incredible importance that education stakeholders placed on knowing what our data said about last year, even though we have very clear calls to action as to how it can be used. And so there's some notes here on the cover sheet about exact, designation criteria and some of the indicators that go into accountability for schools. But this is the list of schools that were identified as reward schools or exited that priority list based on data from the 2020-2021 school year. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that board members may have.
Are there any questions or comments? I would like to say that I'm pleased to see these schools are on the list, the counties and their respective schools, because I see Hamilton has 2 schools that have exited the priority list. So they are to be congratulated and commended for the great work that they and the action that they took to come to this status. So
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for that. Is there a motion to approve this item? Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Kim provides the second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. You have the next item, item S.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jack Powers with the Department of Education. So similar to the state identified reward schools, what I'm presenting here on first and final reading are the state identified exemplary districts. So these are districts that were identified as exemplary based on TCAP data from the 2020-2021 school year. I will not go over again, kind of the intersection of Public Chapter 2 and our ability to call out these exemplary districts and commend them for their great work. But similarly, you can see here on the cover sheet the indicators that we examine when considering these designations. And we would like to present the newly identified exemplary districts using the 2020-2021 TCAP data. And I am happy to take any questions that board members may have.
Jack, would you be willing to read out the list of names of the school districts that are identified?
Absolutely, I would be happy to. It is a bit shorter of a list than the list of schools. And I do want to note that the list of schools is on the State Board's website. It's on the department's website. And I'll also note, too, because I do think it can't be overstated, kind of the excellent work that these schools and districts have conducted, that these schools and districts have been notified by the department and had the chance to kind of be congratulated already. But I'll go ahead and read off the school districts now. So these are school districts that were identified as exemplary districts using 2020-2021 TCAP data. Maryville City Schools, South Carroll Special School District, Newport City Schools, Alamo City Schools, Bradford Special School District, Gibson County Special School District, and Lincoln County Schools.
Excellent. Thank you very much. They are all to be commended, and congratulations. This
Absolutely.
is outstanding. Any questions or comments from board members? Is there a motion to approve item S?
So moved.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second? Second. Mr. Edwards provides the second. Any discussion, comments? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Powers.
you.
It's great to end on a high note there, but
Absolutely.
we're not done. We have some more items to attend to. Next up is teacher licensure actions.
Hello, good morning, Madam Chair, board members. Todd Madison, staff attorney for the board. I'm accompanied by our other staff attorneys, Alex Anderson and Candace Carter. We have for you the staff's recommendations for licensure discipline. At this time, we'd be happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions or comments regarding any of these actions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? And this is items A through P, teacher licensure actions. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Ferguson provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Eby provides the second. Any discussion? This requires a roll call vote.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much for your due diligence and all the work that goes into preparing this for us so we can make the decisions that we made today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we adjourn, I do want to thank every one of our presenters. Each one of you were incredibly professional, and you did your hard work and your due diligence to present the items today for us so that we could make the decisions that we made. So thank you all individually for the great work. Are there any comments or discussions points from any of the board members, the commissioner, or I'm going to ignore you for a minute, or director, our executive director, Dr. Morrison? Any comments? Mr. Eby says he has something, and then I believe something.
I just want to give a thank you to the state board staff on the master tracker plan that's come out now. That I think that is really very, very helpful. It's good to see that and gives us something to do. So, Allie or whomever did that, thank you.
Thank you for that.
See, everything I see is
Mr. Cobbins.
Yes, ma'am.
He has to sit someplace else. I apologize.
Y'all need a reality show. I think it'd be a big hit.
We do tease that he's my, believe it or not, my younger brother. Doesn't he look older? Anyway, I apologize for
I
that.
just want to say on behalf of Mr. Jensen and I, thank you for coming to Memphis. Hope you had a great glimpse into what makes this city and this part of the state unique, and a lot of the passion and inspiration we saw yesterday. And of course, this great university. So I know we hadn't done this in a while, so I think it was good to experience Memphis on the bounce back. So
Absolutely. It was a great time to be here. The school district, the school visits, every aspect of it, the read for the record, that was so special. And I wish we could have stayed longer because there was so much more to see, and we had an opportunity that we missed because we had to leave to be able to read to students. But last night at the University of Memphis, I already mentioned that, I think, a huge highlight there for us as well. So the red carpet was rolled out. We were glad to be in your part of the woods, your neck of the woods. And yes, Memphis represents very well. So thank you. Thank you so much for those comments. Yes, Mr.
I got a
Edwards.
question for Darrell. Is University of Memphis pre-ranked season in basketball? Oh, 11, you
Yeah, we
said.
got that information last night.
last
very
night we
clearly.
were told
Or
seven.
depends on
seven.
who's counting, right?
Depending on which poll you're looking at.
Just wait and see.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, we are officially adjourned. I should say without objection. Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Have a great, safe travels home. See you all next time.